The emergency beacon hit 3 notes, each one designed to stop breath mid-intake. Dr. Vexathul's mandibles snapped tight as the chamber around him erupted into controlled chaos. The Interspecies Behavioral Study Council had been reviewing dietary charts 5 seconds ago. Now every screen flickered with live feed from Classroom 7B. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Report, Vexthul commanded, his carapace shifting color from professional blue to crisis crimson. And make it coherent. Kyle Thoss's voice crackled through the overhead system, rushed but precise. Sir, the 3 juvenile Karathi specimens, subjects K447, K448, and K449. They've somehow escaped the isolation wing, but that's not the primary concern. Then what is? Vexthul moved toward the primary monitor, his 8 legs clicking across the obsidian flooring. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew. Everyone was watching the same impossible footage. They're not attacking. They're waiting. The video feed showed Classroom 7B in perfect clarity. 3 Korathi cubs, each one standing nearly 2 meters tall, with teeth evolved specifically to pierce exoskeletons, with neural architecture designed for solitary predatory behavior, were sitting at student desks. Literally sitting. Their massive spiked shoulders were hunched forward in what Vexthul's racing mind kept insisting was relaxation. That was impossible. For whom are they waiting? Vexthul asked, though he already knew the answer. There was only one human scheduled in Classroom 7B at OR 9:30 station time. Dr. Sarah Jackson, Kyle Thoss confirmed. His voice had taken on the tone of someone naming a biological weapon. She's approximately 3 minutes out from the classroom entrance. Azila's voice cut in from the xenopsychology division, analytical and careful. I'm reviewing the behavioral markers. This doesn't match any recorded Korathi response pattern. Their anterior dorsal spines are lowered, their vocalizations are minimized, and... She paused, and in that pause, Vexthul heard the sound of a scientist's worldview cracking. Their pupils are dilated in response to non-threat stimuli. That's fear responses, Kaltas said flatly. They're afraid of something. No, Azila said quietly. That's not fear. That's anticipation. Vexthul's 4 eyes locked on the 3 specimens. They were moving now, not aggressively, but with coordinated purpose. They were rearranging the classroom, moving objects, creating space. One of them had picked up a stylus and was holding it in its secondary manipulator like it knew how to hold it. Get me a full psychological profile on the cubs, Vexthul ordered. Cross-reference everything. I want to know if they've had any contact with the Jackson human beyond mandatory observation protocols. Already running it, Azila replied. Sir, the profiles are clean. 0 unsupervised contact. The cubs have been in strict isolation for 97 station days. Per your own protocols, they haven't interacted with any living creature besides their handler robots. And those robots are not warm. They don't teach. They don't what? Vexthul demanded. Don't care, Azila finished. Robots don't care, but humans apparently do. And these cubs are responding to something in that classroom that suggests they've learned what it means to be cared for. The monitor flickered. Jackson was turning the corner toward the classroom corridor. Security teams to position, Vexthul ordered. Block the classroom entrance. I want Jackson intercepted before she enters that room. Sir, Kael'thas said slowly, if we separate them now, what exactly are we preventing? Vexthul's entire carapace flushed darker crimson. He didn't have an answer, and that was the most terrifying part. In 97 years as director of cross-species compatibility research, he had never encountered a situation his protocols didn't address. Until now. "We're preventing an incursion event," Vexthul said, though his own voice didn't convince him. If apex predators from the Korathi order can form attachment bonds with prey species, if they can learn behavioral patterns from a human, if they can demonstrate emotion... He stopped. One of the cubs had approached the door from inside the classroom. It was pressing its massive head against the transparent barrier, its eyes tracking the corridor where Jackson would appear any second now. The entire chamber fell silent. "That's not possible," Azila whispered. "Korathi cubs don't recognize individuals. They're supposed to be solitary, hostile, and biologically incapable of sustained cross-species interaction." "Well," Kael'thas said, his voice cracking slightly, "either they've suddenly evolved a new neurological capability in the last 97 days or... Vexthul interrupted, his mind racing through implications that threatened to unmake his entire life's work. "Or humans are something we've fundamentally misunderstood." The classroom door was 50 meters away. Jackson would arrive in seconds. Vexthul had never felt less control in his entire career. "Cancel the security intercept," he ordered quietly. "Sir?" Kael'thas questioned. "I need to see this," Vexthul said. "I need to understand what a human actually does when no one is watching her. Send me to the observation deck. I want maximum sensory feeds and complete isolation." He turned away from the chamber, his mind already reeling. Whatever was about to happen in Classroom 7B was going to change everything the galaxy understood about humans. He was certain of it, and he was terrified he was right. Sarah Jackson had no idea the emergency beacon had sounded 3 times. She was thinking about coffee. Specifically, the fact that the station's synthesizer had finally produced something that didn't taste like recycled atmosphere. She was carrying a thermal mug, still steaming. And she was approximately 4 minutes late for class because she'd had to argue with the cafeteria system about whether her credentials qualified her for 1 refill or 2. The security team materialized in front of Classroom 7B like someone had suddenly focused a fuzzy photograph. "Dr. Jackson?" the lead officer said, and she immediately recognized the tone. It was the same tone her principal used when there was a situation. "We need you to step away from the classroom." Sarah looked at the officer, then at her coffee, then at her classroom door. "Oh, sure," she said, her voice carrying the particular weariness of someone who'd managed teenagers for 2 decades. "Because that always works out well. Whatever this is. Let me guess. Policy violation? Did someone complain about the curriculum again? Because I've got the approval forms right here in my comp." "The specimens escaped containment," the officer interrupted. Sarah's eyebrow rose. "The cubs. The apex predator specimens," the officer confirmed, using the word like it was a weapon. "They're currently in your classroom." "Again," Sarah said flatly. She sipped her coffee. "That's the 3rd time this month. You really need to talk to Vexthul about those isolation panels. They're not securing properly." The officer stared at her. Through the transparent door of the classroom, one of the cubs pressed its massive head against the interior glass, its enormous eyes tracking Sarah's movement. The officer's hand moved toward his containment weapon. "Don't," Sarah said, not unkindly. She set her coffee down on a nearby ledge and pulled open the classroom door. "Seriously, don't. You'll stress them out." She stepped into the classroom before security could respond. Vexthul's voice crackled through the observation feed in the command chamber. She's just walking in there? Confirmed, Kael'thas said. No protective equipment, no defensive posture. Sir, the cubs are responding. The 3 Korathi specimens moved toward Jackson with a synchronization that shouldn't have been possible. But they weren't attacking. Their spiked shoulders dropped. Their vocalizations shifted from aggressive resonance to something almost melodic. The largest one actually lowered itself to roughly eye level with the human, like it was trying to make itself less threatening. Sarah reached out and touched the creature's shoulder, right where the dorsal spines met the primary carapace. "You 3 got out of your room again," she said, the way a teacher might scold a student who'd skipped class. "I specifically told you all that you needed to stay in containment until Vexthul authorized field integration. But no, apparently my excellent teaching methods were too irresistible to resist." She moved to her desk and sat down. Setting out her materials like the 3 apex predators occupying her classroom was completely routine. "All right, everyone, including our 3 guests, settle down. We're talking about cellular adaptation today." Azila's voice in the observation deck was barely a whisper. "She's treating them like classroom animals?" "That's a pedagogical approach," Azila murmured to herself, running the analysis again. "She's establishing normalcy, creating a framework where they're students, not specimens." Sarah pulled up her presentation, and the 3 cubs moved to their usual desks. Apparently they did have usual desks, and settled into an approximation of sitting posture. "You know, interestingly," Sarah continued, completely oblivious to the emergency broadcast still echoing through station communications, "humans and most Earth mammals have similar cellular repair mechanisms. That's probably why my dog likes me so much. The animals recognize something in our biology, something in our behavior, that suggests we're not going to eat them." Through the observation feed, Kael'thas's voice cracked. "She's comparing the cubs to her pet? See how the cubs are responding to the curriculum materials?" Sarah leaned forward, pointing at the screen where the creatures had actually focused their attention. "That's genuine intellectual engagement, not predatory behavior. They're learning. They want to learn because they've associated learning with positive outcomes." The largest cub raised its secondary manipulator, a limb that had never been documented as possessing fine motor control, and grasped the stylus Sarah offered. It held it correctly. Vexthul stood from his observation chair. "I'm going to the classroom," he announced. "Sir, that's a security risk," Kael'thas protested. "Override noted and dismissed," Vexthul said quietly. "Because right now, the only person who understands what's happening in that room is the human who's casually dismantling 90 years of xenopsychological protocol." He was already moving toward the corridor. Vexthul entered classroom 7B like he was stepping into a containment breach. Sarah Jackson glanced up from where she was showing one of the cubs how to use the digital annotation system. She didn't stop what she was doing. "Let me guess," she said, not unkindly. "There's a regulation about students having different biology than humans." Vexthul's mandibles opened and closed twice before sound emerged. "Dr. Jackson, these specimens are doing great, actually," Jackson interrupted pleasantly. "K447 over here just grasped the concept of cellular mitosis. K448 is asking really insightful questions about adaptive mutation. And K449... She gestured to the largest cub, who was carefully copying notes from the display into a physical notebook with its secondary manipulator. "Well, K49 is clearly going to need advanced coursework. The note-taking technique suggests advanced spatial reasoning." "They cannot," Vexthul said slowly, "bond cross-species." "Yeah, about that," Jackson said, turning her full attention to him for the first time. She pulled up a stool and sat, casual as someone settling down for coffee. Oh, I see. You folks have never had pets back home, have you? Yeah, that explains a lot. The isolation training clearly didn't account for attachment theory. Vex Thule felt his entire framework of understanding shift like tectonic plates. Dr. Jackson, this represents a fundamental security threat. Protocol mandates immediate separation. You are currently violating at least 7 containment procedures just by existing in this room. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. Right. I'm familiar with the protocols. You wrote them with the assumption that apex predators can't experience emotional attachment to prey species. Which, fair enough. Most predatory systems on most worlds work that way. But here's the thing. She gestured to the cubs, who had stopped working and were watching the conversation with rapt attention. Humans, we're different. We form bonds with literally everything that shows responsiveness. We form bonds with rocks if you're not careful. That's not possible, Vex Thule said, though his voice had lost its authority. Ask my dog, Jackson replied. We took an apex predator, the wolf, right? And through 10,000 years of teaching, consistency, and positive reinforcement, we turned it into the loyal companion species. We call it a dog. Same genetics. Different expectations. Different treatment. Different result. Azila's voice crackled through Vex Thule's personal comms. Sir, I'm running this through the attachment literature. She's describing classical conditioning, species-neutral behavioral modification through reward reinforcement and consistent environmental safety. She's describing something that shouldn't work, Vex Thule said quietly. And yet, Azila replied, it appears to be working. Jackson leaned back, completely at ease in the presence of 3 apex predators who should, by every metric, have been attempting to eat her. I've taught teenagers for 20 years. The attachment system in humans is incredibly robust. The cubs responded to positive reinforcement, consistency, and what you'd probably call safe space establishment. That's not anomalous. That's just teaching. But you're a different species, Vex Thule tried. Different biology, psychology, evolutionary framework. Yeah, and wolves and humans are also different species, Jackson said. Somehow that didn't stop us from creating dogs. You're overthinking this. Creatures, sapient or not, respond to people who are patient with them and don't treat them like monsters. That statement hit the chamber like a detonation. Vex Thule activated the emergency consultation network. Within seconds, xenopsychologists, security experts, behavioral specialists, and evolutionary theorists were flooding the observation feed, all talking over each other, all equally baffled. What if the specimens are being mind-controlled? One expert suggested. Jackson laughed. That's not mind control. That's classical conditioning. She pairs a stimulus with a reward. The creature learns to associate the stimulus with positive outcome. The behavior becomes ingrained. I literally taught your apex predators to love learning because I paired learning with safety and approval. That's not psychological warfare. That's just good teaching. One of the cubs raised its manipulator and touched Jackson's shoulder gently. She didn't flinch. The gesture was protective, affectionate, impossible. Vex Thule understood in that moment what was happening. It wasn't just that the cubs had bonded with a human. It was that humans had capabilities that reversed every prediction their models had made. Humans weren't predators in the traditional sense. They were teachers. They were community builders. They were the species that had somehow learned to turn wolves into allies, and they'd done it through nothing more devastating than kindness. This has to be contained. Kael'thas said through comms, but his voice was hollow. No, Jackson said gently. This has to be learned. These cubs are going home with attachment to learning. They're going home with evidence that emotional bonding accelerates development across species. They're going home knowing something your species didn't. The teaching works better than protocols. That consistency works better than isolation. She looked directly at Vex-Thul. And your entire civilization's approach to education just became obsolete. The Zalaxian Behavioral Council met in emergency session for the second time that day. This time, Sarah Jackson was present. She was sitting casually at the observation table, reviewing the cubs' notes on a portable display, completely unconcerned about the fact that she was surrounded by the highest-ranking officials in the station's research hierarchy. So, what you're telling me, Vex-Thul said slowly, watching her grade papers, is that humans use attachment-based bonding for rehabilitation, therapeutic intervention, and educational advancement. Pretty much everything, yeah, Jackson said without looking up. Back home, we use this for rehabilitation programs, therapy animals, teaching methods. We learned a long time ago that emotional bonds are more effective than force. I assumed you would have noticed, but I guess your species skipped that memo. She turned back to K409's essay on cellular mutation and made a notation. And this is... Vex-Thul searched for words. Your primary strategic advantage? Strategic? Jackson looked up, amused. No, it's just what humans do. We bond with things. We teach things. We make bonds through teaching. It's not a strategy. It's just who we are. Kael'thas leaned forward. The cubs cannot be separated from you now. Attempting to do so would cause measurable psychological damage. We've documented the bonding markers. They're permanent. Yeah, that's kind of how attachment works, Jackson said. Once something knows what safety feels like, isolation becomes painful. You can't unteach that, which honestly seems like it would be a feature of your species too. Maybe it would be good for the cubs to keep their psychological integrity intact. Azila made notes frantically. This proves attachment bonds have measurable physical manifestations across species. The neural markers are identical to what we theorized but never documented. The implications are extraordinary. The implications, Vex-Thul said quietly, are that every psychological model we've built is incorrect. Jackson shrugged. Or maybe it's just that you never tried the obvious approach. Teaching works. Consistency works. Treating creatures like they're capable of growth instead of like they're problems to contain. Weird how that's effective. 2 weeks later, the cubs completed their coursework. They graduated alongside Jackson's human students, receiving official certification from the station's educational authority. The video footage, K449, accepting its certificate with solemn dignity. K447, attempting to high-five a human student. The gesture was imperfect but clearly intentional. K448, making a speech in broken standard about the value of education, spread through the station's communication network. Within hours, it was being transmitted to home worlds. Other species began requesting human educators within the week. The Xenopsychology Division was flooded with research proposals. Vex-Thul withdrew 3 times to recover from the sheer volume of paradigm-shifting data. He eventually published a groundbreaking paper titled Cross-Species Emotional Bonding as Educational Framework, Implications for Universal Learning Models. The paper cited Dr. Sarah Jackson extensively. 3 weeks into her next term, Jackson was grading papers at her desk. The 3 cubs were sleeping nearby, having already completed their independent reading assignments. Azila was, as always, observing and taking notes. "You know," Jackson said without looking up from a particularly good essay, "I've got 12 human students in that class and 3 apex predators. The cubs have better grades than half my humans. Just saying." Azila paused in her note-taking. This contradicts everything we understood about capability and species compatibility. Jackson glanced over her shoulder. "Or maybe your species just never tried being nice to anything unfamiliar." She returned to her grading. K449 shifted in its sleep, one massive manipulator draped protectively across K448's shoulder. The gesture was so unconsciously tender that it took Azila's breath away. This was attachment. This was bonding. This was what happened when you treated creatures, any creatures, like they mattered. And humanity had been doing it since they learned to domesticate wolves. "You know what's funny?" Jackson added, still focused on her work. "We call it the human touch. Like there's something special about what we do. But really, we just care. And we're patient. And we believe things can change if you give them enough time and kindness." She marked an A+ on the essay and moved to the next one. "Apparently," she continued, "that's revolutionary. Station protocol updated at 14:37 station time. Isolation training was terminated effective immediately. Attachment-based learning became the new standard for all interspecies educational programs." The Interspecies Behavioral Study Council voted unanimously to implement human-style pedagogical methods across 5 different research initiatives. 3 other species requested human educator assignments before the vote finished counting. Sarah Jackson was packing her classroom materials when Vexthul approached her desk. "So, basically," she said, not looking up from her stack of student evaluations, "I came in late to class, and now I'm redesigning your entire psychological framework? You fundamentally altered our understanding of 5 species development capabilities." Vexthul replied carefully. "You've generated more usable research data in 3 weeks than our division produced in 90 years. Jackson placed the papers in her bag. "I just treated them like students instead of problems. You're welcome, I guess." "The cubs will be returning to their homeworld next week," Vexthul said. "They've strongly requested that you continue their education through remote learning sessions." "Of course they did," Jackson said. She looked up. "They're learners now. That's who they are. You don't just turn that off." Vexthul considered this. "What you've shown us is that education could become the foundation of intergalactic diplomacy. If humans can bond with apex predators through teaching, perhaps they can bond with any species. Perhaps you are the bridge we've been searching for." Jackson shouldered her bag. "Or maybe people, all species, just respond better to someone who believes in them." Revolutionary concept, I know. She left the classroom with the 3 cubs following behind her, moving protectively around her smaller frame. She was already thinking about tomorrow's lesson plan. Something about evolutionary adaptation. K489 would love it. The cubs had learned what it meant to have a teacher. That's just how humans worked. They taught, they bonded, they transformed everything they touched through sheer, relentless kindness. In the observation chamber, Vexthul watched Jackson leave through the corridor. 3 Korathi specimens moving like devoted bodyguards around a single human woman. He understood finally what the Council had missed for centuries. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy through weapons or superior technology. They hadn't achieved dominance through military strategy or political maneuvering. They'd conquered through something far more dangerous. They'd conquered through genuinely caring about everything they met, and there was no defense against that.